Daniel Ricciardo has joined Renault. Can we just take a second just to understand what a bombshell this is and what huge implications this has on the whole world of Formula One for the next couple of years going forward, but also for the remainder of this season and where all the other drivers on the grid are going to fit in. Welcome to F1 Reviews, and I've had to stop completely what I was doing, rush straight home to try and get this video out for you guys, to get my thoughts and opinions across on this huge move in the world of Formula One. The biggest transfer we've seen in F1 probably since Vettel joined Ferrari. I think it's that big, if I'm being perfectly honest. Yes, Verstappen moving to Red Bull was a big move and Bottas to Mercedes, but I think this is even bigger than those two. And I think this could be one of the most influential decisions in Formula One we've seen for a very long time indeed. Right, let's get down to the facts then. Ricciardo, at the end of this year, 2018, for 2019 onwards, it's not yet been set how long his contract is at Renault. Ricciardo will be driving for Renault alongside Nico Hulkenberg. I think that'll really set a statement for Renault. They're already improved dramatically since they joined or rejoined F1 back in 2016, and next year they're going to be pushing for that third place spot in the championship, especially because Red Bull are getting Honda engines. I believe that's the biggest reason why Ricciardo is leaving Red Bull. Honda engines haven't proved to be that reliable. Red Bull and Renault engines have also not proved to be that reliable. So it's almost for Red Bull making the decision to switch to Honda. It was the worst of two pretty poor engines, to be perfectly honest with you. They went with Honda. Ricciardo obviously feels that's the wrong decision. He obviously feels that they have more focus on Verstappen. He wants to be a number one driver, which I think he fully deserves. I'm not too sure he'll forget that status straight away at Renault. Hulkenberg is a fantastic driver, one of the most underrated on the grid. So I think that's a fantastic lineup they've got there at Renault. But it is a surprise. It's definitely a surprise. I don't think anyone really saw this coming. There were a few rumours that Ricciardo might join Renault, might join McLaren, but no one really believed them. You know, everyone was confident he'd stay at Red Bull, stay at a race-winning car. He's already won twice this year in the Red Bull, but he obviously feels that his best chance for winning the World Championship in the next few years is at Renault. That is a huge statement. That is a huge statement. I think it's the right thing for his career. I really do, and when I heard the rumours about him going to McLaren or Renault, especially the McLaren one, if I'm being honest, I thought, yes, he's got to take that opportunity. Red Bull are going to favour Verstappen, which is fine. Verstappen's got age on his side. He's probably just as talented as Daniel Ricciardo. And as a brand, I think Verstappen is much more appealing to them than Daniel Ricciardo. So I think Ricciardo has done the right thing on moving to Renault, and I do think up until 2021, I think with the Honda engines we've seen now since 2015, they are not competitive. They've made a big step this year, but not big enough in my opinion. And I think Ricciardo going to Renault is the right move. I'm really shocked by this. I think you can tell, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the description. And like I say, I've tried to just get back as quickly as I can to report this for you guys and have a conversation about this. Because, like I say, Ricciardo going to Renault isn't all about just Daniel Ricciardo. It's about every other little aspect and driver that goes along with this deal. So, let's quickly talk about that. Silly season in full swing, Ricciardo to Renault. What does this mean for Carlos Sainz, who's currently at Renault? Well, it could be very easy for Carlos Sainz. He is a Red Bull driver. He was on loan at Renault. So very easily, they could just put him into the Red Bull for next season. That could very easily happen. But I think it's unlikely to happen, if I'm being perfectly honest. And the reason for that is Pierre Gasly at Toro Rosso. My driver of the day at the Hungarian Grand Prix last weekend has put in some really solid performances this year in that Toro Rosso with the Honda engine. So I think he's had the better season than Carlos Sainz, if I'm being 100% honest. He's looked the quicker driver in a less competitive car. He's got age on his side over Carlos Sainz. Only just, but it is a couple of years difference, which can make a big difference in sport in general. And so I think it'll be Pierre Gasly who will get the shot at Red Bull. but he's not the only one. Obviously, Sainz and Gasly are the main choices, and I was planning to do a transfer video, and obviously right now I'm not going to go through every single transfer because I wanted to focus on the main news that is Ricciardo to Renault. All the details about contract length and those sort of things should be coming out later on today in the next few days, but like I say, I just want to quickly, go through the other people that are linked with this Red Bull seat. Sainz and Gasly being the main two, but doing a little quick search through the internet, obviously nothing too major. The other two names are Fernando Alonso to Red Bull, which was very much a deal in the works back in 2010, but also Esteban Ocon, the man who was rumoured to be joining Renault next season. Obviously, Ricciardo has now filled that spot. Ocon, a bit of sort of doubt whether he'll stay at Force India. Very much doubt and dark clouds over Force India as a team, whether they'll even be in F1 next year, full stop. So Ocon could be an interesting shout for Red Bull. But Fernando Alonso, I just want to go back to that one. That could be very interesting indeed. I'm fully of the opinion that Alonso will not be in Formula 1 next year unless he could get one of those top 3 cars. And Red Bull is one of those top 3 cars at the current stage. So he and his lawyers and his agents will be on that phone straight away to Christian Horner, the Red Bull guys, trying to get a seat. He will definitely be trying to do that. If he can't, he'll be out the door. But I think for Fernando Alonso, he will definitely try and go for this seat. I don't think he will. I really don't. And I think it'll be stupid if Red Bull signed him up. Not because of his speed, but because of everything else. All the baggage that comes with Fernando Alonso. And I think, you know what? Against Verstappen, I think Verstappen would outperform Alonso in this day and age. I really think so. So for Alonso's career, for Red Bull's as a team's career, that would be the wrong decision. So it's between Sainz, Gasly and Ocon. Ocon to Red Bull would be an interesting one for sure. Like I mentioned, he's out of favour almost with the Mercedes boys, not because of his talent or speed, but mainly because they're so happy with the Hamilton-Bottas deal. And that team works so well in Mercedes. Ocon is not going to get a look in unless Bottas in the next couple of seasons is going to have some awful times, which I don't see happening whatsoever. So Ocon has got to look for these other opportunities. He's not going to get his foot in the door at Ferrari for a considerable amount of time. I'm certain of that indeed. So he's got to make that choice. What team is he going to put all his eggs in? You know, you can't be dilly-dallying. And a team like Force India, almost a B team, a Mercedes B team, they're never going to be fighting for the World Championship. Mercedes are never going to allow one of their customer teams to overtake them. Yes, it's happened in the past, but I think in modern Formula 1, that's never, ever going to happen. So Ocon, he's going to have to start looking around, especially now Renault are happy with their lineup, and I'm sure they will be for, well, I imagine up until 2021. Most of the drivers' contracts are going up till then, so I imagine now all these drivers are lining themselves up for 2021, and that's what Ricciardo's done, and that's what Ocon needs to do. But as mentioned, I think if I was going to put money on anyone to go to Red Bull next year, I'd say Pierre Gasly. I really do. I think Red Bull have seen something in him this year, and he's really performed. And I think he's deserved of the seat as much as I love Carlos Sainz. And last year, he was one of my favourite drivers. And this year, I think he's had a lot of reliability issues, lots of difficult races, getting stuck in traffic. And I think he's not been able to show his full potential for sure. But Gasly in a worse car, under harsher circumstances, has definitely shone in this season. I think deserves the chance at Red Bull. Sainz has almost got his mini break almost at Renault this season, but hasn't really been able to capitalise on it, especially if you compare it to his form in the Toro Rosso last season. So a bit of a disappointing season for Sainz, and I think it'll really have huge implications on where he'll be driving next season. On screen now, you can see Sainz next to the team he could very well be driving for next season, McLaren. I think that'll be the done move. I do not think Sainz will be returning back to Toro Rosso or Red Bull. He'll be looking for seats at arguably the new Force India team or McLaren. I think those are the two that Sainz will end up at next season. But just as we sort of round off this video now, we'll talk about just my final thought on Ricciardo moving in a second. But Toro Rosso, what happens to them in this entire situation? Because if Gasly does move on to Red Bull, if Sainz does not return, what happens to them? Because Red Bull in general have sort of put a stop on this whole Red Bull Young Driver program that they've been running for so long, and that's why they've had Brendan Hartley in the car for the last season and a half now. And there's been lots and lots of criticism about Hartley, so the question is now, will Hartley stay at Toro Rosso, even if Gasly is gone, even if Gasly will stay? And I think yes, I think especially in recent memory, Hartley's put in some really solid performances in the past 2 races. He scored points in Germany, got into Q3 in Hungary, and would have scored if it wasn't for an amazing strategy call from the 2 McLaren cars. But who will fill that other seat? Well, earlier on in the year, there was big talk about Lando Norris and what would happen with him, and I could see him going to Toro Rosso. I really could, and I know he's the McLaren boy, he's the McLaren hope for the future, very much like Lewis Hamilton was. But in Formula 2, he's not really shone particularly bright. He's second in the standings, which is a solid job, and you look at some of the guys behind him, which you might think are a more polished driver, and Norris is still there, up in second, but he's not set the world on fire like Charles Leclerc did, and George Russell ahead of him the same. He's not set the world on fire either. So I think both of those two, George Russell and Norris, probably will be in Formula 1 next season. I think Norris-Toro Rosso is a better fit than Norris-McLaren at this moment in time. The reason I say this is, if they do lose Alonso, which I think they will, I think they won't want to then put in 2 brand new drivers into their teams. Teams very, very rarely do that. There is a few exceptions, of course, but it's very, very rare that happened. Didn't happen at all last season, and the season before that, I don't think it happened either. So it's been quite some time since a team has done it, and I probably should have researched that, but like I say, I just wanted to talk about this and get it out there for you guys. But I think if Sainz does go to McLaren, that's a bit of a risk in itself, and I think although Van Dorn has been up and down this season, started off well, really well in fact, then sort of went off the pace a bit in the mid-season. Now it seems to be clawing back a bit of form, so it'll be interesting to see when McLaren announce their lineup, what Alonso will do. That'll be obviously the big catalyst in all of this, but I think Norris, if he can't get a seat at McLaren, because what could always happen is Norris goes alongside Van Dorn, which again I think would be a very respectable lineup if I'm being honest with you, but all depends on what happens with Sainz, what happens with Alonso, and I think if Norris cannot get a seat at McLaren, he will be definitely looking at a seat at Toro Rosso. Also, earlier on in the year, we had a lot of rumours about Pascal Wehrlein coming back to Formula 1. I believe he should. I believe he definitely had the speed and was very, very unfortunate and sort of got played by the politics of Formula 1, if I'm being totally honest with you. And he was out of Formula 1 not because of his talent, not because of his speed, but because of the politics between all the teams, which was such a shame. He could make a comeback to Toro Rosso, so it's really interesting to see what happens there. But just my final thoughts on this Ricciardo to Red Bull. I definitely think this is the right decision for Daniel and his career. I really do. And I'd love to know if you agree with me or disagree with me there. But I think Red Bull, this is a huge gamble for them going to Honda engines. And we've seen with McLaren, it's not paid off. And I think Ricciardo has analysed this situation and said, you know what? I'd rather be part of a works team. And yes, Red Bull will almost become a works team next year. But I think Ricciardo wants to be this out-and-out number 1 driver, which in a couple of years when Hulkenberg most likely will retire, obviously Formula 1 drivers go late into their 30s, if not 40s, but you imagine that Hulkenberg may retire in the next few seasons. Ricciardo will be looking to take that number 1 spot, if he doesn't already do so early on next season. I don't think he will. I think Hulkenberg will make it hard for him. And I really believe that Ricciardo going to Renault will really push up Hulkenberg's game. In the past few seasons, he's not really had a hugely challenging teammate. He was against Sergio Perez at Force India, but since then, I think he's upped his game for sure. Seems a lot more comfortable in this Renault team and has almost had an easy time of it. So I think that'll be a really interesting dynamic to see. But I'm really excited for this move. This really sets in gear F1 silly season. And always over the summer break, this is the sort of time where we see big money moves, big deals, big transfers. This is the biggest deal we've seen in a very, very long time in Formula 1. I'd love to know what you guys think. Thank you for watching as always, and I'll see you in the next one.